Another day, another banger. This franchise needs no introduction and is one of the greatest action thriller franchises there is. Today you'll be watching all 5 Die Hard movies in both chronological and release order. Without further ado, make sure you're comfortable and as always sit back, relax and enjoy the recap. On Christmas holiday 1988, John McClane is on a flight bound for Los Angeles. Clearly uneasy, a fellow passenger picks up on his nerves and offers a simple tip to help with jet lag, making barefoot fists with his toes on the carpet after landing. After the plane touches down, John grabs his luggage and spots a chauffeur holding a sign that reads J. McClane. The driver, Argyle, is young and talkative, driving John to Nakatomi Plaza. During the ride, Argyle digs into John's story, learning he's still a New York City cop while his wife Holly Gennaro moved to California for a big career opportunity. It's clear both John and Holly had hoped the other would eventually follow, but neither budged. Meanwhile, at Nakatomi Plaza, the company's Christmas party is in full swing on the 30th floor. Joe Takagi, the company's executive, proudly announces that the day marked one of the most successful in the company's history. Holly moves through the crowd, tying up loose ends on paperwork. As she walks down the hall, her coworker Harry Ellis takes the chance to flirt with her, but Holly brushes him off. Back in her office, Holly tells her pregnant secretary Ginny to go enjoy the party before politely showing Harry the door. Alone, she calls home to check in with her daughter Lucy and the family's nanny Paulina, wondering if John made his flight. After hanging up, she looks at a family photo with John and their kids before turning it face down. John's limo pulls up to the entrance of Nakatomi Plaza. Argyle, the cheerful driver, tells John he'll wait in the garage until he hears whether John needs a ride later or has made other plans. Inside, John greets the security guard and heads to a nearby computer to find Holly's office. He notices she's switched back to her maiden name, Gennaro. With that in mind, he takes the elevator up to the 30th floor where the Christmas party is in full swing. Walking through the crowd, John meets Joe Takagi, who warmly greets him and leads him to Holly's office. There, Harry Ellis sits at Holly's desk indulging himself. He introduces himself, but John casually points out that Harry missed a spot. Moments later, Holly walks in and there's a weird exchange between the two. Harry proudly tells John that Holly just sealed the company's biggest deal and was gifted a Rolex for it. Sensing the tension, Joe and Harry step out, leaving John and Holly alone. While washing up, the two briefly reflect on how they missed each other. But the moment quickly turns into an argument over Holly's decision to move to California. Before things heat up further, Ginny interrupts, asking Holly to return to the party. Meanwhile, outside the building, a Mercedes pulls up, followed by a Pacific courier truck that heads straight into the garage. Inside, Carl Vresky and Theo approach the lobby security desk. Without warning, Carl shoots the guard in the forehead. Theo leaps over the desk and quickly hacks into the building systems, disabling all elevators except one and locking down both the garage and the main exits. Carl then moves to take out the second security guard, using a flash grenade and a silenced pistol. In the garage, the back of the courier truck opens, revealing Hans Gruber and the rest of his heavily armed crew. Hans gets to work sealing the front doors, while Eddie slips into a security guard's jacket and takes position at the desk. Meanwhile, Tony Vresky finds the telephone junction boxes and begins tapping into the system. Just as he finishes, Carl arrives with a chainsaw and slices through all the phone lines, cutting off any chance of outside communication. The building is now completely in the terrorist's control. Meanwhile, a barefoot John McClane is making fists with his toes and is surprised it actually helps with his jet lag. He picks up the phone to call Argyle but is cut off, thanks to Carl cutting the phone lines. At the Christmas party, Hans Gruber and some of his henchmen arrive via elevator and fire into the ceiling, grabbing everyone's attention. John hears the gunshots and quickly sneaks out of the office, heading into the stairwell with his police-issued handgun. He almost steps onto the 35th floor, but notices more henchmen wheeling equipment down the hallway. Instead, he climbs to the 32nd floor, still under construction, where he stops to gather his thoughts and figure out how to alert the authorities. In the foyer, Hans addresses the Nakatomi Corporation employees, saying he's there to teach the company a lesson on the real use of power because of its legacy of greed. He calls out for Joe Takagi, but Holly quietly tells Joe to stand back. Still, Joe steps forward after Hans rattles off personal details about his life, showing there's no point hiding. Hans greets him and they ride the elevator to the 34th floor. In the boardroom, Theo demands the CEO daily key code and the encryption number. Takagi calmly says he doesn't have them, and even if he did, the terrorist couldn't steal anything that would hurt the company. Hans corrects him. They're after the $640 million in bearer bonds locked in the company's vault. John, hidden nearby, overhears the tense exchange. Hans counts to 3, demanding the codes, but Takagi refuses. Without hesitation, Hans shoots him in the head. He then orders Tony to remove the body and tells Theo to start hacking the vault. As John slips away, he accidentally makes a noise, but the terrorists rush it off and focus on the vault. Meanwhile, in the garage, Argyle sits in the limo, blasting loud music and chatting with a girl on the phone. Heinrich, Marco, and Uli work inside a room filled with the building's heating and cooling machinery, wiring it with what appears to be explosives. Meanwhile, Theo walks Hans toward the vault, explaining its 7 layers of security. He assures Hans he can crack the first 6 but warns that the 7th, a powerful electromagnetic lock, can't be bypassed locally. Hans calmly assures him he has a plan. On the 32nd floor, John curses himself, feeling stuck until he comes up with an idea. Trigger the fire alarm. He pulls it, hoping to draw outside help. Eddie quickly alerts Hans, who instructs him to call 911, cancel the alarm, and shut down the system. John initially celebrates when he sees fire trucks approaching but grows furious as they turn off their sirens and leave, deceived by the terrorists. Soon after, Tony arrives on the floor to see who activated the fire alarm and searches for their missing culprit. With John hiding among the construction materials, the two eventually collide in a brutal fight. They crash through drywall and beams and even end up tumbling down a stairwell. The struggle ends when Tony dies from the fall, though. In the vault, Theo bypasses the first security layer and starts drilling deeper into the system to continue the heist. Back upstairs, John seizes Tony's radio, lighter, and Heckler & Koch MP5 machine gun. He then rigs Tony's body in a chair inside the elevator, sending it down to the Christmas party. As the doors slide open, horrified hostages see Tony's corpse, now wearing a sweatshirt reading, "Now I have a machine gun. Ho ho ho." Hans is furious but keeps his composure, though the message clearly shakes him. Meanwhile, John rides atop the elevator, eavesdropping on the terrorists and jotting notes on his arm. Once the coast is clear, he takes the elevator up, sneaks onto the roof, and starts planning his next move. Meanwhile, Hans informs Carl that Tony is dead, which enrages him. Carl demands vengeance, but Hans tells him he'll get his chance after Heinrich and Theo finish their tasks. Up on the roof, McClane uses the CV radio, broadcasting on frequency 9, trying to call for help. The 911 operator brushes him off, thinking it's a prank. Frustrated, John yells for them to send help, but before he can say more, Carl and his men open fire, forcing him to duck for cover. The operator, finally alarmed, dispatches a single officer to investigate. That call reaches Al Powell, who's casually buying Twinkies for his pregnant wife. Back on the roof, John dodges gunfire and escapes into a dead-end closet with a large ventilation fan. He jams the fan with his gun and crawls through, narrowly avoiding the attackers as he makes his way back to floor 35. Still pursued, he's cornered near the elevator shaft and has no choice but to climb down the ventilation shaft to floor 34. Using his machine gun and its strap to lower himself, the strap suddenly slips loose, sending John plunging down a few floors. At the last second, he catches himself on a ledge and crawls into a horizontal air vent. With only his lighter for light, he inches forward through the tight space. But Carl spots the flicker of the flame and follows, determined to find him. He fires into the ducts and presses down on them, checking for John's weight. Before Carl can find him, he's called away, giving John the chance to escape. John exits the shaft just in time to see Officer Al Powell arriving at Nakatomi Plaza. Al speaks to Eddie, who's disguised as a security guard and is fooled into thinking all is normal. Desperate, John tries to break a window with a chair to get Al's attention but fails. From the roof, James spots him and radios Marco and Heinrich to stop him. Marco pretends to surrender, but when Heinrich charges in, John shoots him dead. Marco retaliates, trapping John under a conference table, firing through it from above. Crawling to the table's end, John quickly reloads and fires upward, killing Marco. As Al starts to leave, John grabs Marco's body and hurls it onto Al's car, shattering the windshield and finally alerting him to the danger. The terrorists open fire on Al's cruiser, forcing him to reverse at full speed, crashing over a retaining wall. Surviving the crash, he immediately calls in backup. In a news equipment room, journalist Richard Thornburg picks up the police call for help on a scanner. Seeing an opportunity for a big story, he argues with a news producer and insults a news anchor just before going on air. Despite the chaos, he's handed a news van and sent to investigate the situation at Nakatomi Plaza. As police begin arriving at the building, John McClane taunts Hans Gruber over the radio. Hans tries to brush it off, mocking John for watching too many cowboy shows. But John takes it as a compliment.
Sorry, Hans. I didn't get that message.
It's very kind of you. Who are you, then?
You're most troublesome.
Sorry, Hans. Wrong guess. Pain in the ass.
Just another American who saw too many movies as a child.
Yippee-ki-yay.
Hans regroups, getting updates from his team. Theo is making solid progress cracking the vault, but there's bad news. John has taken Heinrich's bag of detonators. Hans quickly orders Fritz to retrieve them. Meanwhile, Al Powell radios John and McClane gives him a quick breakdown of the situation. Their conversation is cut short by the arrival of Deputy Police Chief Dwayne T. Robinson, who instantly belittles Al and takes over command despite having no grasp of the danger inside. Back inside Nakatomi Plaza, Hans has set up his command post in Holly's office. Holly takes the chance to approach him with two simple demands: a couch for the pregnant Ginny and permission for the hostages to use the bathroom. Importantly, she uses her maiden name, Gennaro, to avoid being linked to John. Down in the garage, Argyle, still parked in the limo, finally notices the chaos unfolding when he sees the news report on TV. He tries to leave the garage but quickly realizes he's trapped. Turning on the CV radio, he starts listening in on John and Al's conversation. Outside, the police set up spotlights and prepare a SWAT team to breach the building. The team, led by Rivers and Rodriguez along with 2 other officers, makes its way to the front entrance. Al advises John to stay put, but John knows better. He's seen the terrorists' heavy firepower. Sure enough, as the SWAT team tries to break in, Uli and Eddie open fire, pinning them down. The police escalate the situation by sending in an armored RV to break through the front doors and rescue the SWAT team. But Hans is ready. He orders James and Alexander to take out the RV using a rocket launcher. The first shot hits, and before the police can recover, Hans tells them to fire again. That's the last straw for John. Furious, he grabs some C4, rigs it, and tosses it down the elevator shaft to kill both James and Alexander.
It's him.
The police and journalist Richard Thornburg watch in shock as the second-floor explosion tears through Nakatomi Plaza. Deputy Chief Robinson snatches the radio from Al Powell, but John McClane quickly insults him, making it clear he'll only speak with Al. Inside, Harry Ellis grows restless. After having some alone time with his good friend Mr. Koch, he decides to step in, thinking he can solve the problem. He approaches Hans Gruber, claiming he can get John to cooperate. Without hesitation, Harry gives Hans John's name and occupation, then uses Hans' radio to contact him. Meanwhile, Thornburg sends an assistant to dig up information on John McClane. Sensing there's more to the story, on the radio, Harry pretends to be John's close friend, urging him to hand over the detonators. But Harry doesn't realize Hans plans to kill him if John declines. John tries to reason with Hans to spare Harry, but Harry keeps up the act. John refuses to give in, knowing Hans can't be trusted. Hans, without hesitation, shoots Harry in the head, killing him instantly. The hostages are horrified, and the police outside watch in stunned silence. Robinson blames John for Harry's death and orders Al to go home. But Al refuses, determined to see this through. John fires back over the radio, giving Robinson a piece of his mind. Hans then contacts the police directly, listing names of fellow freedom fighters he demands be released from prisons around the world. He also asks for a helicopter to take him and the hostages to the airport, but John and Al aren't fooled. They know Hans has another plan. Just then, Special Agent Johnson and Agent Johnson from the FBI arrive, taking over command from Robinson. Hans heads to the mechanical room to inspect the explosives, but unexpectedly runs into John McClane. Thinking fast, Hans pretends to be an escaped hostage. John, buying the act, hands him a handgun on floor 33. Hans quickly pulls the weapon on John, but when he pulls the trigger, nothing happens. The gun was never loaded. John tries to force Hans into revealing his plan, but before he can react, the elevator doors open and a firefight erupts, with John killing Fritz and running for it. He then uses his surroundings and takes out Franco, but quickly runs out of bullets. Hans, aware that John is barefoot, orders Carl to shoot out the glass walls around the office John is trapped in. Glass shatters everywhere as Carl tosses in a flash grenade, but when the smoke clears, John is gone. However, in his escape, he's forced to leave behind the bag of detonators. Hans retrieves the detonators and hands them to Uli. At the Christmas party, Carl vents his frustration by smashing decorations, and Holly silently celebrates. John, now bleeding from his feet, limps into a bathroom to clean and bandage his wounds. Over the radio, Al tries to keep John company, sensing how much he's struggling. Meanwhile, Theo updates Hans, announcing he's bypassed the first 6 security layers of the vault. All that remains is the electromagnetic lock. At the same time, Thornburg's assistant returns with new information. She's found John McClane's records and his LA address, giving Thornburg more fuel for his news report. Back at Nakatomi Plaza, Hans and Theo realize that the FBI's next move will be to cut the power to the building. Theo smiles, knowing that the electromagnetic lock will automatically disengage when the power is cut. Outside, Special Agent Johnson orders a power company worker to shut down electricity across a 10-block radius. As the city plunges into darkness, the FBI agents celebrate. Confident they're closing in, Robinson frets over how the mayor will react to the blackout, while Al complains about the FBI's predictable tactics. Inside, Hans and Theo rejoice as the vault door finally opens, revealing $640 million in bearer bonds. John radios Al, asking him to say goodbye to his wife if anything happens, but Al refuses, encouraging John to pull through. Meanwhile, Thornburg arrives at Holly's house, forcing his way in and threatening Paulina to let him interview the McClane children. Back at Nakatomi Plaza, John limps into the machinery room and discovers a large amount of C4 wired to blow the roof. As he radios Al to warn him, Carl ambushes John, seizing his radio and gun. But before Carl can finish him off, John throws a punch and the two break into a brutal fistfight, both knowing this has become personal. Elsewhere, Hans watches a small TV and spots the McClane children in Thornburg's broadcast. Realizing Holly's connection to John, he grabs the face-down family photo from her office and storms over to her. Firing his gun into the air, he orders the hostages to the roof and takes Holly with him to the vault. On the way, Holly calls him out, realizing he's nothing more than a common thief. Meanwhile, John and Carl continue their brutal brawl. Carl gains the upper hand, landing solid hits, but John fights back, managing to wound him. Carl grabs a gun and fires, grazing John's shoulder as he dives through a doorway. Carl charges after him, but John seizes the moment, knocking the gun free. The fight escalates, both men wrestling and trading blows up a staircase. Finally, John manages to wrap chains around Carl and swing him across the room and into a wall, killing him. two Army helicopters approach Nakatomi Plaza, carrying Special Agent Johnson and Agent Johnson. As they ride in, they casually discuss their plan to ambush the terrorists, noting they'd be fine with a 25% hostage loss rate. On the roof, Uli and Eddie herd the hostages upward. John McClane arrives just in time, shooting Uli as he chases after the fleeing crowd, desperately searching for Holly. Jenny tells John that Holly is with Hans. Realizing the roof is wired to blow, John fires Uli's machine gun into the air, trying to warn the helicopter not to land. It misinterprets his warning and fires at him, causing him to scramble to a hidden ledge. With no other option, he wraps a fire hose around his waist. Meanwhile, Eddie informs Hans that the hostages have returned to the 30th floor, and in a panic, Hans immediately triggers the explosives while John jumps off the roof. The rooftop erupts in a massive explosion, and even rips the fire hose from the wall, causing John to shoot through a nearby window and crash inside. The weight of the hose suddenly jerks him backwards, but he unties it just in time. The destroyed helicopter crashes into the building, triggering more explosions that rip through the 30th floor and surrounding areas. Holly screams and John rushes toward the vault where Hans is scrambling to finish loading the $640 million in bearer bonds. John then spots a mail cart filled with office supplies and takes what he can while noticing he only has 2 bullets left. Meanwhile, Argyle notices Theo unloading an ambulance from the back of the courier truck, part of the terrorists' escape plan. Seizing the moment, he slams his limo into the ambulance and jumps out to punch Theo, knocking him out cold and stopping the escape. As Christoph rushes down the hallway carrying a stack of bearer bonds, John McClane knocks him out cold. He then catches Hans, Eddie, and Holly, with Hans pressing a gun to her head and forcing John to drop his weapon. Eddie picks up another machine gun, but Hans signals him to hold his fire. He instead mocks John for playing the cowboy, and with John's hands raised, he bursts out laughing. Hans and Eddie chuckle too, but in that split second, John rips a handgun taped to his back and kills Eddie, as well as injuring Hans in the shoulder, sending him stumbling backward. Hans crashes through the window but manages to grab onto Holly's Rolex, still clinging for life. As he slowly raises his gun at Holly, John unclasps the watch and Hans loses his grip and plummets from the building. A couple minutes later, amid the debris and chaos, John finally meets Al face to face and shares a relieved hug. Deputy Chief Robinson storms over and berates John for the destruction caused when Carl emerges from the rubble ready to fire. Before he can shoot, Al fires, killing Carl and saving the couple. As the dust settles, Argyle crashes his limo through the garage gates, finally free. John and Holly walk toward the limo only to be stopped by Thornburg, who is punched in the face by Holly before walking off. The couple climbs into the limo and Argyle drives away from the wreckage of Nakatomi Plaza, its towering structure still burning against the night sky. Die Hard 2 opens up outside the snowy Dulles International Airport in Washington, D.C., where a car is being towed for a parking violation. John McClane, waiting for his wife Holly's plane, rushes over trying to stop it. He tells the sergeant he's an LAPD cop who recently moved from New York to Los Angeles, but the officer ignores him. As the car gets towed away, McClane's pager goes off. Inside the airport, McClane asks the receptionist where the phones are and heads over. Meanwhile, on the news, there's breaking coverage about General Ramon Esperanza, a deposed dictator and drug lord. At a nearby hotel, Colonel Stewart practices martial arts while hearing that Ramon is being extradited to the U.S. from Val Verde. Once funded by American money to fight communist insurgents, Esperanza turned to coke smuggling after Congress cut ties. One of his key supporters was disgraced former Special Forces officer Colonel Stewart. Back at the airport, McClane searches for a phone to return the page. Meanwhile, Stewart and his team, including Cochran, Baker, and O'Reilly, leave the hotel to start their operation. McClane finally connects with Holly, who's calling from Northeast Airlines Flight 140, telling him her flight's delayed. Nearby, an elderly passenger shows Holly her taser, saying she carries it for protection. As McClane leaves the phones, he bumps into Colonel Stewart. There's a moment of recognition, but Stewart brushes it off and walks away, only to briefly glance back before moving on. Elsewhere, at a small Heidi Lake community church, a van arrives carrying Colonel Stewart's men. Inside, the church custodian watches the news about Esperanza's arrival in Val Verde. Baker and Thompson knock, claiming they need to check conduit lines. The man lets them in, mentioning it feels wrong to close the church, even though the parish plans to keep using it. Without warning, Baker pulls out a suppressed Glock and shoots the man dead. Thompson shuts off the TV and radios in that their base is secure. Back at the airport, Colonel Stewart's second-in-command Garber finishes a secure call before meeting Cochran and Miller in the lounge. Cochran updates him on an incoming storm and Garber orders them to proceed. John, on a break, spots them acting very suspiciously, but hesitates to alert the cops, especially since one of them had towed his car. Reporter Samantha Coleman is also on site chatting with some Justice Department officials about Esperanza's transfer when she notices Colonel Stewart and Garber walking together. Garber informs Stewart there's an issue with personnel when Coleman approaches but is brushed off. Meanwhile, John trails Cochran into the luggage handling area. He asks an airport worker to open the sealed door to the restricted zone, but the worker, sensing trouble, leaves to get airport security. Alone, John spots Cochran and Miller fiddling with a control panel and asks them for identification. Instead of complying, Miller and Cochran open fire, forcing John to fire back. As the shootout intensifies, Miller orders Cochran to head to higher ground. Spotting John near a conveyor belt, Miller takes a shot, but John fires right back. Miller's last round hits the luggage above John, knocking the Beretta 92 out of his hands. While Miller reloads, John sneaks up and smacks him from behind, disarming him. But Miller isn't done. He fights back with some serious hand-to-hand skills. John neutralizes his adversary, but Cochran fires at him, forcing him to retreat. Cochran quickly follows, but John jumps him and they both tumble onto another belt. However, McClane shoves Cochran into a baggage press, ending him instantly. Moments later, airport police flood the area and Miller makes his escape. John quickly grabs a bike and tries to catch him, but after crashing into a luggage cart, Miller vanishes, and John is arrested on the spot, seeming to have lost his ID. Meanwhile, on Holly's flight, reporter Richard Thornburg finds himself on the same plane ride. Two flight attendants clearly dislike Thornburg, knowing him for his past editorials where he insulted female flight attendants, calling them bimbos. When Thornburg notices Holly, he immediately demands to be moved, citing the restraining order against her. One of the stewardesses, impressed by Holly's punch, jokes about celebrating with champagne. Back at the airport, Cochran's body is zipped into a body bag and John is let off the hook. But before he can process what's happening, reporters swarm the area. Over at the church, two mercenaries are working on the conduit lines as Miller arrives and informs Colonel Stewart that Cochran didn't make it. Miller then reports that a cop killed Cochran, and while he barely escaped, he still completed his mission. Stewart pulls out his gun and threatens Miller's on what will happen if he fails. At the airport police station, John is brought before Captain Carmen Lorenzo, the hot-headed and stubborn chief of police. Lorenzo immediately lays into John, accusing him of violating FAA and District of Columbia regulations by opening fire at the airport. John fires back, saying he needs to shut down the luggage handling area, but Lorenzo isn't interested. Frustrated, John tells him they used a rare porcelain gun designed to bypass metal detectors, but Lorenzo doesn't budge. Instead, he orders John to be escorted out of the airport. Furious at Lorenzo's incompetence, John is determined to get answers on his own. He grabs some ink and paper from a car rental stand, and before the body can be taken away, he rushes to Cochran and takes his fingerprints. Somewhere in the skies, the F-16 fighter jets escorting Esperanza's plane leave with their mission complete. In the back of the plane, Esperanza sits under tight security. He requests his shackles be loosened, but the guards refuse. As he waits, Colonel Stewart and his team are busy setting up their makeshift airport operations inside the nearby church. Meanwhile, John reaches out to his old friend, Sergeant Al Powell. He asks his friend for the fax number at the station. As the car rental receptionist sends over Cochran's fingerprints, John tells Powell to run them through every available database. Powell agrees and promises to get back to him as soon as he finds something. At Dulles Tower at Trudeau, the IAD Chief of Air Operations briefs Chief Engineer and Communications Officer Leslie Barnes about a massive storm rolling in from the north. Barnes advises that they need to scale back operations so crews can clear the runways between landings. Not long after, Powell calls John back with an update. The fingerprints belong to an American military sergeant named Oswald Cochran. According to Department of Defense records, Cochran was declared dead in a helicopter crash in Honduras. Before that, he had been involved in covert operations. As John makes his way toward Dulles Tower, Samantha Coleman recognizes him as the hero from the Nakatomi Plaza takeover and tries to speak, but John turns around and walks away. Back in Dulles Tower, Trudeau informs Barnes and Lorenzo that National Airport has shut down due to completely iced-over runways. Just then, John arrives. Lorenzo, already irritated, reminds him that Dulles Tower is restricted. Without hesitation, John presents the file on Cochran showing he was a professional mercenary. And with Esperanza on his way to the airport, John is certain something bigger is at play. Meanwhile, Burke finishes welding the conduit box shut. Once it's operational, he contacts Stewart over a secured radio, confirming that all systems are ready as they prepare to take full control of the airport. Then Burke fires up a chainsaw, cutting through the ILS conduit lines, while Kahn smashes through the other line with an axe. As the lights on the runways suddenly go dark, everyone scrambles into action and switch to emergency lighting. But all systems in the tower are offline and completely inoperable. All incoming aircraft is to travel to alternate airports, and with at least 15,000 people inside, news of a system failure would cause mass panic. Suddenly, Colonel Stewart's voice fills the room. He announces that he has taken full control of the airport systems. He demands the plane carrying General Esperanza must land at a designated runway where it will not be intercepted. Additionally, a fully fueled 747 cargo plane must be prepared and placed at his disposal. He warns that any attempt to restore the airport systems will result in severe consequences. Trudeau, enraged, shouts that Stewart can't do this, but Stewart's cold response is simple: "I just did." Then the line goes dead. Barnes quickly rushes to the air traffic controllers with a plan, while John warns Lorenzo that if Esperanza escapes on the 747, they'll never catch him. Lorenzo insists his SWAT team can handle it and orders John removed. Barnes wants to find a way to transmit and remembers the new terminal wing they are building. As John is escorted out, he overhears Barnes planning to reach the antenna array. Coleman suddenly arrives, but Lorenzo orders her out. In the elevator, John stops it, climbs out, and realizes Stewart is behind the takeover. Back in the tower, Barnes explains his plan: to rig the antenna array so they can communicate with the incoming planes without tipping off the terrorists. Trudeau gives him the green light as well as a SWAT team for protection. In the airport's basement, John hears phonograph music and finds a small apartment. He shuts it off and is startled by Marvin, a homeless janitor living there. Marvin helps John locate the annex skywalk in the new terminal where the antenna array is. Realizing it's a prime ambush spot, John asks for a quick escape route. Meanwhile, Trudeau vaguely warns circling planes of severe system issues, avoiding mention of the takeover. Frustrated passengers see flights marked as delayed. In the meantime, Barnes gathers tools joined by 5 SWAT officers heading for the antenna array while John crawls through a ventilation duct. Meanwhile, Barnes and SWAT reach the annex skywalk and Barnes updates Trudeau before disconnecting. As they walk the moving skywalk, 4 airport workers seem occupied until one shuts it off. The SWAT sergeant confronts him, but the worker shoots the SWAT commander dead and the ambush kicks off. John hears gunfire, drawing his weapon as he crawls through the ventilation duct while Barnes takes cover, cut by glass. Sheldon on the scaffolding kills a SWAT officer while another kills Shockley before being shot by Mulkey, who then takes out the remaining SWAT members as Barnes hides. O'Reilly moves in, but John kicks a vent grate onto his face, shooting him through it as Sheldon and Mulkey fire. John topples the scaffolding, crushing Sheldon, but gets pinned. Mulkey, out of ammo, rushes for John's pistol, but John grabs it first and kills him. Barnes seems to be in good shape, but out of nowhere a bomb triggers and completely destroys the antenna array. Meanwhile, aboard Northeast 140, Thornburg notices planes flying close by and glances at an uneasy Holly. They argue over his decision to expose her identity to Hans Gruber during the Nakatomi Plaza takeover. At the airport, medics and officers remove the bodies of the SWAT team and mercenaries. Barnes, speaking to Trudeau over the phone, confirms the loss of Lorenzo's team and the destruction of the antenna array while John patches up his injured arm. They overhear radio chatter and John finds a radio on Shockley's body. In the church, Garber tries to contact O'Reilly's team but there's no response. John shows Barnes the radio, but Barnes explains it requires activation through a coded panel which will take time to crack. Conn informs Stewart that the intercepted call from Barnes confirms their men have been killed. Enraged, Stewart calls Dulles Tower, warning them of severe consequences. John, listening in, grabs the radio and challenges Stewart, asking how much drug money Esperanza paid him to betray his country. Stewart claims Esperanza stands against communist aggression and that the US government needs to learn a lesson. John fires back, and Lesson 1 starts with killing policemen. What's Lesson 2? A neutron bomb. Stewart coldly replies it's something in between and tells them to watch. He orders Thompson to select a plane low on fuel. Stewart commands him to activate the ILS landing system and recalibrate sea level to -200 feet. Thompson reluctantly complies. In the control tower, the team watches in horror as Stewart, using a high-pitched voice, impersonates Dulles' approach, directing Windsor 114 to land on runway 29. John realizes Stewart intends to crash the plane, which has 230 passengers, onto an invisible runway due to the snowstorm. Barnes confirms they can't override the transmission. Desperate, John grabs paint thinners, 2 pipes, and rags, attempting to create a signal. Barnes hands him his coat and helps lower him to the ground. As the pilots set their course to land, Stewart, in his normal voice, confirms they are on track. John reaches runway 29, wrapping rags around pipes and lighting them to create makeshift torches. He waves them frantically, trying to signal the plane to abort its landing. Lorenzo notices someone on the runway and Trudeau, using binoculars, realizes it's John. He understands John is trying to save the plane but isn't sure he'll succeed. As the jet gets closer, John waves even more desperately, but the plane overshoots him, crashing into the concrete. Fuel ignites, flames spread, and Stewart, hearing the pilot's dying screams, mercilessly taunts them. Moments later, the plane explodes, killing everyone on board. In the control tower, everyone watches in horror as wreckage burns across the area. Devastated, John curses Stewart for murdering all those innocent people. Stewart coldly announces to Dulles Tower that complying with their demands will prevent further destruction. Rescue crews rush to the wreckage while John, dazed and shaken, walks into the tragic scene. Meanwhile, Trudeau enters the overwhelmed police station, now packed due to the crash. He tells Barnes, who's receiving medical treatment, to find a way to warn the circling planes of the new danger. Someone hands Trudeau the passenger manifest of Windsor 114's victims. He approaches John, offering quiet support, admitting he feels the same way. Trudeau then informs him that the government is sending an anti-terrorist military unit to take down the hijackers. He also warns that Holly's plane, Northeast 140, has only 90 minutes of fuel left. The news snaps John back into focus. He has to act fast. Back at the church, Stewart and Garber listen to Coleman's report on the Windsor crash. Aboard Northeast 140, Thornburg investigates the air traffic situation. He asks his friend Victor to use a listening device, but all Victor hears is an airport beacon indicating the tower is silent. Thornburg urges him to keep monitoring. Outside, 2 Army helicopters land, deploying Special Forces Unit Blue Light. Their leader, Major Grant, meets with Rollins, Trudeau, Lorenzo, and John. Grant insists his team will handle Stewart, having trained and served with him. He sets up a command post in the airport police station. When John asks Trudeau if things are improving, Trudeau has no answer. In the control tower, Barnes and the team search for a way to warn the planes. Barnes realizes they can reroute communications through the outer marker beacon, broadcasting a warning without alerting the terrorists. The controllers switch frequencies, allowing Barnes to announce the takeover, advising pilots not to respond on their own channels. Meanwhile, Thornburg and Victor eavesdrop on the transmission. Shocked by the situation, Thornburg records and documents everything. At the airport police station, one of Grant's men discovers the scrambling device in the luggage area. John approaches Telford, who tells him the portable decoder will take 2 hours to work, but John knows Holly doesn't have that long. With the men going to the briefing room for a meeting, John tries to follow but is denied access. He quickly rushes to Marvin and asks if there is a way to listen in on their conversation. As Marvin pulls out a map, John hears radio chatter between Stewart and Garber and discovers a radio. Marvin explains he found it in the luggage area after one of Stewart's men dropped it. With the code still punched in, John can use it to his advantage. With General Esperanza's plane coming on the scope, Stewart calls Dulles Airspace and is lighting up a runway for Esperanza to land on. He threatens them to not land any other planes or else. On board the foreign military one, Stewart contacts the pilots acting like Dulles Tower and tells them to land on runway 15. Esperanza in the meantime decides to kill one of the guards in the back. He then makes his way to the pilots and forces them to listen to the instructions they were told. The co-pilot tries disarming the general but receives a bullet instead. As Stewart calls in, the general decides to kill the captain as well and commandeer the plane on his own. Jumping to the encoded radio, which John can hear, Esperanza has near zero visibility and no cabin pressure. Needing to land immediately, Stewart directs him to runway 25R and John takes a shortcut to the runway. Needing lights to help him land, they activate and the general approaches the runway. Stewart tells Esperanza they'll extract him in 5 minutes, but John is also ready. With everyone awaiting the plane to land, which needs about 90 seconds, John shoots the lock of the grate, blocking him to the runway. As he sticks his head out, the plane lands and is about to run him over. He barely manages to get out of the way in time and the plane stops moving. The general grabs his pistol and makes his way out until John punches him and says he's not leaving. Stewart and his men arrive just in time though, and John tries fighting them off but injures the general before locking himself in the cockpit. The men decide to lock the door on him, and the general is not happy a mere cop done so much damage. Stewart mocks John from the outside and begins firing with every round he and his team have available. Once they're done, they toss multiple grenades into the cockpit and John acts fast. He uses the ejector seat on the plane to send himself upwards as everything blows up beneath him. The men cannot believe he is still alive, but with fire trucks approaching they retreat back to the church. Meanwhile on the NEA airplane, fuel is running low. A flight attendant enters the cockpit informing the pilot that passengers are nervous. He suggests that television will calm them down. In the back, Holly sees Thornburg writing a news report and laughs at him. Meanwhile, the stewardess announces an episode of The Simpsons will be playing. Thornburg doesn't care and fakes an illness to slip into the bathroom and call his news station, requesting to speak with the head news contributor. Back at the airport, John tells everyone the general is injured. Major Grant then storms in and screams at McClane for his idiotic stunt. Both men quickly face up to each other and the action is postponed when the Pentagon calls in. Barnes quickly approaches John and says the response time from Stewart was too quick, which means their base is somewhere nearby. Barnes uses old maps and believes that the intruders must be hiding in a specific neighborhood. As the scene cuts to Holly, she asks the flight attendant if they have enough fuel to keep flying in circles like this, and she is told they have plenty. In the meantime, John and Barnes are running their own investigation and are going from home to home. With the next stop being a church, John has a look and spots a sentry. Believing it to be the right place, Barnes is told to call the Marines while John makes a move. Holly simultaneously calls him, and John gets into a fight from the sound of his phone. Grant is alerted to the terrorist base of operations and makes a move while John fights his attacker. With Stewart's escape plane needing 30 minutes, John finishes off the assailant just as Grant and his men arrive at the base. John falls back and Lorenza begins blasting him for his insolence until Grant tells him to shut his mouth and go away, praising John as a hero. As the troops move forward, they trip a wire and alert the men inside. Stewart tells his team it's time for war, and bullets start flying. Shots are fired from both sides and Stewart's man places bombs all over their systems. The general is taken out back to some snowmobiles and manages to escape. John runs after them and succeeds in killing a few bogeys. The troops in the meantime go inside the church and find the armed C4. Clearing the area and sealing the building, McClane follows the terrorists all by himself. Clearly having a kick about doing the most dangerous things on planet Earth, he starts catching up to the men. Realizing who he is, the team stops and fires at him. He evades as good as he can until he performs a stunt and makes Stewart believe he is as good as dead. Moving out, John is angry at not completing his mission, and upon picking up one of the terrorist guns, he notices something alarming. Stewart in the meantime calls the airport and receives confirmation on his awaiting plane on Hangar 11. Major Grant and Stewart then radio each other, and it is hilarious to watch. Their conversation literally ends with Grant wanting to disarm the C4 from Stewart's dead corpse. Back on the plane, Thornburg calls the news station, and upon listening to the audio of the pilots, the news station gets ready for live broadcasting. Grant and his soldiers in the meantime have a laugh with each other, and out of nowhere, Grant kills the only man that wasn't on their previous military mission with them. Grant contacts Stewart on a hidden radio line and tells him he is on schedule and in position. John simultaneously links up with Marvin just as the news goes live with a special bulletin. The news reporter quickly puts Thornburg on the screen, who explains the situation. John also forces his way to Lorenzo's office and tells him Grant has betrayed them. Not believing him, John fires one of Stewart's guns on Lorenzo to show him it is a fake and the firefight was a decoy. Lorenzo calls his entire unit to get prepped and ready for war, including himself. Outside becomes quite chaotic though, as Thornburg is once again causing problems. With panic quite apparent as everyone runs, the news also reaches the plane, and Holly listens to the live broadcast and gets an idea. Lorenzo tells McClane to get into one of their cars, but a taxi gets in their way. With the chaos being way too much to handle, John sees Coleman and calls for her help. On the plane, Holly has heard enough shit from Thornburg and tasers the man unconscious. Grant in the meantime arrives at the hangar where Stewart and the general are waiting for him. Greeting one another, the men there are very happy about how they've duped literally everyone. However, John isn't done just yet, and is using Coleman's chopper to make his way to the hangar. With the terrorists celebrating their victory prematurely, the helicopter closes in and John wants to land on their path and play chicken, but the pilot refuses. Holly's plane, on the other hand, has only 5 minutes left of fuel and John needs to act fast. As the captain tells his passengers to get ready for an emergency landing and to get into crash positions, all their hope is in John right now. And as you can guess, the crazy son of a bitch wants to jump on top of the plane. And he does exactly that and lands on its wing. John immediately plays around with the plane and the general realizes that they can't take off. Recognizing it is McClane once again, they cannot use live ammo as the fuel is nearby. Grant goes to handle the situation, but John jumps him and the two fight only using their bodies. As both men go back and forth, John pushes Grant and he gets stuck in the plane's engines and bye-bye Charlie. John then sees where the fuel is, but Stewart goes to attack him. Injuring our boy, John kicks Stewart away from him, but it doesn't work. Losing the battle, McClane hangs on the plane for dear life and smartly opens the fuel tank as he is kicked off. Stewart the moron doesn't notice this and clears the obstruction. Once the door is closed, the general begins his takeoff and John laughs.
Yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker.
The fire chases the plane faster than it can take off and makes a big boom. The pilots on Holly's plane see the runway from John's fire trail and they use it to successfully land. Barnes and the boys at base are happy to hear the outcome. The second the plane doors are opened, John sprints towards his beloved. As emergency services arrive, everyone celebrates a job well done. John walks around the plane and screams his wife's name. Coleman and her crew begin recording and Holly catches sight of her husband. Realizing he was the man that saved the day yet again, they embrace in a hug. Coleman goes to capture the moment but changes her mind and leaves them be. Marvin arrives on the scene and tells John and Holly to jump in. Lorenzo spawns as usual and tells John the fine he got at the airport earlier has been dismissed. Being a pretty pathetic thank you, the movie comes to an end. Die Hard with a Vengeance opens up in the beautiful city of New York. As everyone goes through their daily routines and their lives, a massive bomb triggers, taking out the Bonwit Teller convenience store. At the cop shop, mayhem is quite apparent when Inspector Walter Cobb gets an urgent call. A man named Simon, claiming to be the perpetrator, says the original bombing was just the start. He demands that John McClane is to walk through Harlem with a racist sign even though he is currently on suspension. Simon tells the inspector they will commence the game. Simon says. Cobb and his team, including detectives Joe Lambert, Connie Kowalski, and Ricky Walsh, drive John to the location in a police van. During the ride, it's clear that John's life is in rough shape, and as usual he's once again estranged from his wife and has been drinking heavily. Ricky updates the team on a series of recent crimes, 3 murders in Red Hook and the theft of 14 dump trucks from a Staten Island yard. As they pull up to Harlem, John strips down to his underwear, joking to Connie that she's the first woman to see him like this since Holly. Lambert tapes a gun to his back while Cobb gives him final instructions. Backup will be 10 blocks away, which doesn't sit well with John. With no other option, John takes the sign and steps out of the van. Cobb promises they'll be back in 15 minutes, but John grimly replies that he'll be dead in 4. Now alone, he walks into Harlem, fully aware of the danger ahead. On a street corner, shopkeeper Zeus Carver is greeted by his nephews Dexter and Raymond, who try to sell him a stolen radio that a thug gave to them. Zeus calls them morons for being used by the thugs and lectures them about life. Once he's done, the kids go to leave to school but tell their uncle he needs to look at this. Having a peek, Zeus tells his nephews to call the cops and report a murder in progress. Without hesitation, he walks toward John, trying to defuse the situation before it turns deadly. He urges John to hide inside his shop before a nearby gang notices him. But it's too late. The gang spots John and begins closing in. John quickly tells Zeus that he's a cop and explains that the man who bombed Bonwit Teller forced him to wear the sign in Harlem as a twisted game. Trying to stall for time, Zeus tells the gang that John is just an escaped mental patient from Bellevue Hospital, but they don't buy it. Within moments, they attack. John takes several hits before Zeus notices the gun taped to his back. Grabbing it, he holds the gang at gunpoint long enough for the duo to jump into a taxi and speed away. Inside the cab, Zeus, now nursing a slash wound on his arm, fumes over the likely destruction of his shop. Still shaken but focused, John tells the driver to head for the downtown police station, much to Zeus's frustration. At the police station, John is treated in Cobb's office while Zeus gets patched up in the bullpen. Dr. Fred Schiller, the department psychologist, concludes that Simon is a textbook megalomaniac obsessed with controlling John. He warns that Simon's game is personal. He wants to break John before killing him. Lambert notes that John has plenty of enemies, but Schiller insists Simon's name is likely real. Lambert finds a suspect, Robert Simon, linked to extortion and kidnapping, but John rules him out. Bomb expert Charlie reports a playground bomb, an epoxy-based binary liquid explosive. He demonstrates by mixing two clear liquids and tossing in a paperclip, which causes a violent explosion. He warns that once the red liquid mixes with the clear one, detonation is inevitable. It could take 10 seconds or 2 minutes. Lambert then mentions a recent theft of 2,000 pounds of liquid explosives from Livermore Labs. Officer Jane interrupts. Simon is calling. John, Cobb, and Lambert answer while Schiller listens in. Simon demands John and Zeus go to a phone booth at 72nd Street and Broadway without backup. Cobb tries to reason with Simon, calling John a reckless cop whose suspension, failing marriage, and drinking make him unworthy of attention. John sarcastically thanks him, but Simon doesn't budge, repeating his demand. Zeus refuses, saying he only helped John to prevent a police riot in Harlem. Cobb orders John to convince him. Weiss says the bomb was found in Chinatown, but John lies, telling Zeus it was in Harlem. Believing his neighborhood is in danger, Zeus reluctantly agrees to go. Soon enough, the duo arrive at the phone booth with a team watching them nearby. Kicking a woman off the booth, the phone begins ringing, and here comes the moment of truth. Upon answering, Simon tells them there are explosives in the trash receptacle next to them and they need to answer a riddle correctly or it will detonate. The riddle is, as I was on my way to St. Ives, I met a man with 7 wives. Every wife had 7 sacks, every sack had 7 cats, every cat had 7 kittens, cats, sacks, and wives. How many were going to St. Ives? Being told Simon's number is 555 followed by their answer, they have 30 seconds to solve the riddle. Eventually, Zeus comes up with 2,401 but changes his mind and says only the man was going to St. Ives and the number they have to call is 555-0001, as they call it. Simon says they are 10 seconds late and chaos erupts. But nothing detonates, however, and Simon laughs at them. Jumping back on the phone, Simon says he didn't say Simon says and continues to say it's 9:50 and train number 3 is arriving now. In 30 minutes the train will detonate unless they travel to News Kiosk in Wall Street Station. They can only use civilian means of transportation and the clock ticks away. Needing to travel 90 blocks in 30 minutes, John hijacks a cab and takes a red-on route. John is taking an alternate route than where he should be going. Taking a shortcut through the park, their backup loses them. But this honestly might be added to my bucket list because John looks like he's having so much fun scaring the shit out of everyone. Taking dips and turns, he eventually jumps back on the road and Zeus tells him they have 27 minutes left. Getting stuck in peak traffic though, John contacts base command and calls in a murder. Expecting an ambulance to head to the scene, he is on point and finds the ambulance swerving through traffic. Sticking right behind the truck, it stops, and with 18 minutes to go, John makes his way through the wrong side of traffic and stops the car, planning to ride the train the rest of the way. He tells Zeus to go to the phone while he disarms the bomb. John unfortunately misses the train though and opens up a grate in the middle of the street to land above the train. Breaking his way inside, he has about 15 minutes to find and disarm the bomb. Zeus has his own issues and a stuck-up snob enters the taxi and demands to be taken to Wall Street. As John searches for the next 15 minutes, Zeus arrives at the station 1 minute from the deadline. With John finding the bomb with less than a minute to go, he has a look and I don't think he knows how to disarm it. Zeus gets to the phone but the man there won't get off, and as Zeus shouts, an officer raises a gun at him. Holding his hands up, the phone rings and Zeus needs to answer it. John meanwhile pushes everyone to the front of the train as he moves to the back. Zeus tells off the racist officer and answers the phone only for Simon to be disappointed that John is not with him. Saying he has failed, Zeus ducks to the ground while John tosses the bomb out of the train, causing it to derail and almost hit civilians. Fortunately, no one was killed even though there was mass destruction. Zeus gets up and has a look around to see John giggling and laughing at his accomplishment. As John is treated by paramedics, Lambert reports that there were only cuts, bruises, a few concussions, an old man's pacemaker failure, and a pregnant woman's water breaking, but no deaths. John notes that even if they had arrived on time, the bomb still would have gone off. Something doesn't add up. Before he can dwell on it, a woman tells him and Zeus they're being called. They are taken to an FBI van where Cobb introduces them to agents Andy Cross and Bill Jarvis. Cross shows John photos of 2 men asking if he recognizes them. John doesn't. The agents question whether he and Zeus were followed. Sarcastically, John says he felt a burning sensation and thought it was his toes. Jarvis insists he cooperate and Cobb vouches for him. Frustrated, John demands to know why Simon is targeting him. Jarvis explains that one man is Matthias Targo, a Hungarian mercenary explosives expert. The other is a former East German colonel, skilled in infiltration and English accents. John asks what this has to do with him. That's when an agent asks if the name Gruber means anything. John flashes back to Hans Gruber's death. Simon, they reveal, is actually Simon Peter Gruber, Hans's brother. Just then, Simon calls saying he planted 2,400 pounds of explosives in a Manhattan school set to detonate at 3 p.m. He orders John and Zeus to Tompkins Square Park in 20 minutes on foot. Cobb hands John a cell phone and they take off running. Cobb then gathers all first responder services alongside literally anyone that has half a badge. He gives a speech more inspiring than I show speed, and everyone begins the hunt to search for the bomb with just over 3 hours to do so. However, no one suspects that Simon watches all this from the rooftop above, and his plan seems to be working to perfection. The next part of his plan is in motion, considering the entire New York City force is out on the streets. With over 10 trucks coming at Ricky, he tries stopping them, but Simon, using his American accent, says he's part of the city engineer's office and wants to get an idea of the damage of the train derailing. Ricky falls for their bluff and agrees to help take Simon and his team down to see the damage for themselves. As Ricky goes down, Simon, accompanied by his other men, enter the Federal Reserve Bank and ask to see Mr. Little. Outside, the trucks make their way in while Ricky and his 2 cop companions are taken out on the spot. Wearing fake police uniforms, Simon's operation is truly underway. They begin deploying a massive machine through the hole, while in the Reserve Bank, Felix Little pays his guests a visit. Back on the crime scene, Katya moves deeper into the subway just as their machines make their way inside. Katya begins digging through a wall while Simon and his troops take out the security as well as Mr. Little. Stealing the men's uniforms once again, a massive drilling machine begins cutting a path toward the Federal Reserve's underground vault. As the rest of the security team is taken out one by one at the reserve, the machine concludes and has opened a way for Katya to get into the vault. With the police being too busy with the bomb to answer, the final guard is taken out by Katya from behind, and with that, Simon has full access to the vault. The team begins ripping open door after door. This vault contains over $140 billion worth of gold. As John and Zeus race toward the park, John explains that he threw Simon's brother Hans off the 32nd floor of Nakatomi Plaza and figures Simon wants revenge. When they reach the phone booth in Tompkins Square Park, John, still catching his breath, picks up the call only for Simon to mock him for being out of shape. When John asks what he wants, Simon simply says, "What has 4 legs and is always ready to travel?" Zeus recognizes it as an old elephant riddle and spots a fountain with an elephant statue. There, they find a suitcase bomb and 2 water jugs. John places the suitcase on the fountain's base. Despite Zeus's warnings, he opens it and accidentally arms the bomb. Simon calls again, revealing that the bomb has a proximity circuit, forcing them to stay close. To disarm it, they must use the 2 jugs, one holding 3 gallons and the other 5 gallons, to measure exactly 4 gallons and place it on the scale. As Simon collects the billions worth of gold, John solves the puzzle quite easily and makes sure to only leave 4 gallons in the 5-gallon jug. Zeus carefully places it on the scale and the bomb is disarmed with 5 seconds to spare. Simon calls again, surprised they're alive. John offers to find the school bomb, but Simon says he has 2 hours and 47 minutes to figure it out. He instructs John to find an envelope under the fountain's rim and solve 21 out of 42 before hanging up. With the next place being the home team dugout, John believes it all to be a wild goose chase and tells Zeus to grab the bomb. He then spots some teens robbing a candy store and stops them in their tracks. With the kid telling John it's Christmas and that someone could steal City Hall metaphorically, John realizes Simon's motives. Stealing the kids' bikes alongside Zeus, they almost get run over by a dump truck and John looks around only for his eyes to stop at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. Walking towards the bank and telling Zeus to give the bomb to the cops to handle, the fake cops alert Simon to John and Zeus approaching. Realizing that he's had his fun with John, Simon orders the troops there to kill him. He tells them to leave Zeus alone though, and after Zeus hands them the bomb, they leave without any hesitation. However, something isn't right, and Zeus can sense it. John, on the other hand, walks into the reserve and shows them his badge. After laughing at his clothes, the officer on site asks if he wants to accompany him to the vault if he believes something may happen. Walking into the elevator, John is surrounded by 4 men. However, he notices the badge number on the officer beside him and realizes it's Ricky's. John takes them all out but gets injured along the way. Meanwhile, Zeus investigates the subway tunnel. Surprisingly, he finds John down there and the two put 2 and 2 together to realize the thugs stole billions worth of gold. Zeus finds a heavy gold bullion on the ground and takes it. John realizes the dump trucks stolen earlier were the key to Simon's whole operation, and the duo steal another car to find the trucks. After failing to find the dump trucks on the Brooklyn Bridge, John and Zeus spot them on the FDR and give chase. John tries to call Cobb but realizes his phone was damaged. As they discuss the 21 out of 42 clue, a car cuts them off. Frustrated, John calls the driver Hillary Clinton, sparking an idea in Zeus. 21 out of 42 refers to US presidents. Neither knows who the 21st was. Realizing their car is too slow, John spots another vehicle and takes it but accidentally leaves the gold bullion behind. He quickly calls Cobb, reporting that the whole thing was a heist and they stole the Federal Reserve gold which is being moved north in dump trucks. Cobb, overwhelmed with the school bomb, struggles to believe him. John urges him to close the East River bridges and send helicopters, but the call cuts off. Cobb makes the call to close all East River bridges north of 59th Street. The thugs meanwhile realize the men at the reserve haven't called in and something must have happened to them. To create some chaos and havoc, Simon calls up a radio show and tells them that the cops are looking for bombs at schools. Everyone quickly shits it and half the city panics. John and Zeus lose sight of the dump trucks until Zeus spots one. John crashes through a highway wall to stop it. The driver, Jerry Parks, says he's heading to the water aqueduct. Jerry takes John to water tunnel number 3 with Zeus following. The foreman reveals workers relocated after tearing up the tunnel. John realizes it's Simon's men. The tunnels run under a sawmill to the cofferdam with vent shafts every 2 miles. John sends Zeus to Yankee Stadium while he heads to the tunnel. As Jerry drives John toward the water pipe, he explains details about Tunnel 3. Their route is blocked by a dump truck, and when Jerry prepares to exit, John stops him. He knows Simon's men are inside. Taking Jerry's hard hat and jacket, John steps out and shoots both men dead. Searching Nils, John finds a radio and a roll of quarters. Jerry, seeing the body, hands John back his hard hat and jacket. John instructs him to contact Cobb and figure out who the 21st president was. Jerry tells him it's Chester A. Arthur, giving a brief history before John takes off. As John drives through the tunnel, Simon tries contacting Nils. John taunts him, confirming Nils, Klaus, and 4 others from the bank are dead. Simon, unfazed, tells John the truck he's driving contains $13 billion in gold and asks if he wants a deal. John sarcastically offers to run him over instead. Approaching the dam, John finds a temporary bridge out of place. As he attempts to fix it, an explosion triggers a massive flood. Racing back to the truck, he tries to escape, but the rushing water overtakes him. Climbing onto the truck's roof, he grabs a vent shaft just before the wave engulfs him. The force propels him through a manhole, launching him onto the flooded ground near the Catskill Mountains. Zeus, driving nearby, spots John flying out of the manhole and stops. John asks if he went to Yankee Stadium, but Zeus says no one was there. Suspicious, John asks if anyone followed him. Zeus admits he led them on a wild goose chase just as gunfire erupts. Both men scramble into the car and Zeus speeds off. While all this takes place, Cobb is told the Federal Reserve has the largest gold storage in the world and John was telling the truth. Jerry then appears out of nowhere, and as he tells Cobb what is going on, the police enter another school to search for the bomb. After some searching, the team has discovered the bomb in plain sight. Opening up the doors, the timer shows just over half an hour to detonation, which also has an abort code. Since Simon threatened to detonate the bomb if even one kid left the school, Cobb needs help, and as usual, John is on the case. As both he and Zeus are chased by Simon's men, they talk about the 21st president and how a school is named after him. At the school, meanwhile, Lambert acts as a fire instructor and wants to run a new fire drill for the children in case the bomb goes off. Both of Zeus's nephews are in the school, unaware of what is really happening behind the scenes. John meanwhile takes over the wheel and tells Zeus to hang on. He then pulls off a frickin' awesome stunt but crashes once he's done. At the school, some kids thought it would be nice to play hide and seek and the morons start playing cards behind a locked door. Meanwhile, John searches the corpse of his assailant and finds he has 10 quarters for some reason. Believing it's for the bridge toll, they drive and spot the dump trucks on a boat. Zeus starts bugging out on himself and wants to jump, but John has another idea. With 15 minutes to go until detonation, the kids are getting ready to run, but Cobb has faith that John will get the code for them. John, as usual, hooks a line to the boat carrying the trucks, and Zeus tells him he'll go first. As the suspense builds at the school, our duo slowly climbs their way onto the boat without the guards noticing. However, when their truck runs out of line, the guard notices and the truck falls over the bridge, causing the two to plummet, killing the guard in the process. As Zeus complains about the fall, he looks around and finds nobody nearby. He and McLean get to work and have little time to do so. With the containers of gold downstairs, the men discover something in one of them and go to investigate the containers. Upstairs, with the clock running down, Zeus and John decide to split up. Zeus sees quite a few troops and follows Katya but is almost caught. Making his way to the control room, he holds Simon at gunpoint. With Zeus demanding the abort code, Simon refuses despite a gun being pointed in his face. When Zeus pulls the trigger and nothing happens, Simon explains the safety is on and shoots Zeus in the leg. John, on the other hand, immediately resorts to violence and heads underground to the containers. After killing another man on the spot, McLean is knocked out from above. The massive man begins tossing him around, and back at the school, Charlie is told they need to evacuate with the little time they have remaining. As the kids are all told to sprint, Zeus's nephews see the commotion. Fortunately, no one was watching the school and the bomb did not go off. Charlie is told to get moving as well when the kids locked upstairs are spotted. Lambert grabs the key for the door and goes to save them. Charlie refuses to leave if there are kids trapped inside. John, in the meantime, injures the monster beside him, but it does nothing. Instead, he resorts to using a massive chain, and it eventually gets the job done. With about 2 minutes until detonation, John goes to find Simon and makes it into the control room. Lambert frees the kids and Charlie snips a wire from the bomb. John initiates a mayday call to the Coast Guard and the bomb starts mixing the liquid. Lambert and the kids get trapped on the roof and Charlie cuts another wire, only to discover the liquid was pancake syrup. John sees the real bomb on the ship and Simon has duped them once again. Simon claims to be a soldier, not a monster, when John tells him his brother was a piece of shit. Simon then contacts the Coast Guard and wants them to record a message. He plays an audio recording of himself saying the West has stolen the world's wealth and caused economic starvation. As Zeus and John are lowered with the bomb, Simon plans on blowing them and the gold across the Long Island Sound. Seemingly a political terrorist all along, Katya is told to remove the troops to safety.
Hey, got any aspirins? I've had a bad headache all day long.
Must be a lucky day.
On the escape boat, Katya is told the gold is not on the boat and Simon has betrayed them. Katya takes out her gun but decides to spare Simon, linking up with the rest of the crew. Zeus regrets saving John in Harlem. Thinking it led to their situation, John assures him there's no gold on the boat. Knowing the Gruber family, he believes Simon wants people to think he destroyed $100 billion in gold. John insists they won't die and asks if Zeus can pick locks. Zeus says he can if he has something big enough. John pulls a metal splinter from the tow truck cable lodged in his shoulder and spits it into Zeus's hand. As Zeus works on the lock, he admits he's starting to like John. John tells him not to, revealing he lied. The bomb they found wasn't in Harlem but Chinatown. It was the only way to get Zeus to come along. Zeus asks about John's wife. John admits he and Holly are separated because he never called her back after an argument. Zeus laughs, calling him stupid for ruining his marriage over one call. After unlocking John's cuffs, the splinter drops. As John searches for it, he notices the bomb activating. Refusing to leave Zeus behind, he severs the bomb's liquid connectors with a crowbar, also freeing Zeus. They escape just as the ship explodes, throwing them into the ocean. On shore, Lambert confirms Ricky's body was found. Cobb reassures John that authorities are focused on salvage operations. Zeus reminds him they're alive, meaning Simon lost. Lambert hands John a quarter to call Holly, but as John goes to make the call, he notices the aspirin is from Quebec and takes off running. In the meantime, Simon and his entire crew celebrate the billions of gold they have successfully stolen. But like every other occasion, these dumbasses are celebrating prematurely. Now possessing the net worth of a small country, Simon locks eyes with Katya and wants to go somewhere private with her. Their men, on the other hand, realize they've been discovered by authorities. With helicopters in the air and cops blocking the street, it's time for the final battle. Both teams gear up and the dump trucks get onto the road, with their destination being Nova Scotia. Simon feels personally annoyed and wants to kill John once and for all. Flying their own chopper out of the base, they shoot at Zeus. Returning fire, their pistols ain't doing shit compared to the heavy artillery their opponents have. Landing the chopper, Zeus gets stuck in his seat and McClane goes to distract Simon. It seems to be working and John takes cover. Realizing he's low on ammo and only has one bullet, he and Simon lock eyes and John fires at the electrical lines above the chopper. With Simon finally dying, John and Zeus have a laugh with each other. But it's time to get serious, and the next phone call to Holly might be scarier than the entire terrorist plot. Calling her number, the movie comes to an end. Live Free or Die Hard begins with a woman making calls to a list of hackers. One by one, these hackers break into different government systems, planting codes crucial to military and other high-security sectors. But once the job is done, one of the hackers finds himself in grave danger. His computer and house explode in a fiery blast. It's clear that whoever is behind this operation is eliminating every hacker involved, leaving no loose ends. Meanwhile, at the FBI headquarters, every computer screen suddenly glitches, then reboots. The entire office immediately realizes what's happening. FBI Director Bowman wastes no time. He orders his team to track down every possible suspect and bring them in for questioning. In the next scene, we meet Lucy, a young woman dealing with an annoying guy. Before things escalate, John McClane steps in. It turns out he's her father. Lucy, however, isn't pleased to see him. She's frustrated, accusing him of spying on her. John insists he just wants to talk, but she isn't interested. She tells him she'll call if she ever wants to speak, then walks away. As John gets back into his car, he receives a call from Sclavino. The FBI needs a favor. They want him to pick up a hacker named Matthew and bring him in for questioning. Clearly annoyed, John isn't thrilled about the task, but he agrees and heads out. Inside his apartment, hacker Matthew is deep in a text chat with someone giving him instructions. What he doesn't know is that the person on the other end is sitting in a van just outside, and they've planted a virus on his computer, set to blow up his entire place. Just as he's about to close the application, unknowingly triggering the explosion, there's a sudden knock at the door. It's John McClane. Outside, the criminals realize their first plan has failed. They immediately switch to Plan B, taking Matthew out themselves. Inside, McClane and Matthew go back and forth, but Matthew eventually gives in and lets him inside. Meanwhile, the hit squad outside loads up their heavy weapons, waiting for the right moment. As Matthew glances toward the window, thinking of escaping, bullets suddenly rip through the apartment. He panics while McClane dives to the floor, dragging Matthew down with him. As soon as the gunfire stops, they crawl toward the hallway and call the elevator. Two of the hitmen head upstairs, but McClane is ready. He hurls a fire extinguisher, blasting the man right out of the building. The other opens fire, forcing McClane and Matthew to retreat back inside. A shootout erupts through the door. Seeing an opening, McClane punches one of the attackers straight through a wall, grabs his gun and fires, wounding the other. Just as they're about to make a run for it, the virus planted on Matthew's computer activates. A bomb goes off, killing the intruder inside. Without a second to waste, McClane and Matthew escape through the window, rushing down the stairs to McClane's car. As they speed away, another attacker smashes through the window and starts choking McClane. Keeping his cool, McClane steers the car into a wall, crushing the attacker on impact. But the danger isn't over yet. Another assassin leaps onto the hood. McClane swerves and maneuvers until he finally throws the man off. He immediately grabs the radio and contacts the local chief officer. Meanwhile, the two surviving assassins receive a call from the same woman who had been coordinating the hackers. She reports back to Thomas, their leader, telling him that 3 of their men are dead and the mission failed. Clearly, he's not happy. Back in the car, Matthew is spiraling into panic, struggling to understand why anyone would want him dead. At the criminal's headquarters, Thomas orders his own team of hackers to track down Matthew. Once they pinpoint his location, he sends a helicopter to find them. Meanwhile, John and Matthew are on the road when Thomas's hackers take control of the traffic lights. Suddenly, every intersection around them turns red, trapping them in the middle of the street. Realizing what's happening, John gets out of the car and quickly assesses the situation. He sees that the lights have been manipulated and knows they're being targeted. Wasting no time, he orders Matthew to get out and they start moving on foot. Back at the FBI, chaos erupts. The entire country is under attack. Government buildings, law enforcement agencies, and critical infrastructure are all being hacked. Sirens blare as alarms go off and agents scramble to evacuate. The stock market plunges, adding to the nationwide panic. In response, Bowman sets up a temporary command center, trying to make sense of the unfolding disaster. As they discuss the crisis, John and Matthew arrive at the base. John demands to speak with Bowman. When they finally sit down, Bowman tells John that the situation has changed. They no longer need Matthew. But before the conversation can go any further, the hackers launch their next move. Across the country, a chilling video begins playing on every screen. It's a mashup of different US presidents, their words carefully edited together to deliver a terrifying message. Every piece of American infrastructure is now under their control. Matthew quickly explains to John that what they're witnessing is called a fire sale, a highly coordinated attack designed to systematically dismantle an entire country. Bowman, already on edge, snaps at Matthew to stay quiet, but John pushes back. He reminds Bowman that they just sent a full tactical team to kill Matthew, meaning he's valuable to whoever is behind this. Bowman considers this and reluctantly agrees. He orders both John and Matthew to be taken to the interrogation unit, where the other hackers are already being questioned. On the way, Thomas's team is listening to the radios and finds his location. In the car, Matt admits that he knew some of the suspects Bowman had brought up. He says that a company contacted him to see if their database could be breached and they were his competition. He had no idea he would be helping them do this. The radios are cut off by the enemy, and a woman begins to talk on the radio, directing them into an ambush. Matt recognizes her voice and tells John that she's in on it. He jumps on the radio and tells her he wants to speak to her boss. Thomas jumps on and they begin to talk. He knows everything about him, including his kids and mortgage payments. He resets his 401k to 0 and begins taunting him. He then makes John an offer. If he shoots Matt in the head right there, he will clear his debts and set his kids up for life. John refuses the offer and threatens Thomas. At that moment, a helicopter finds them and begins to open fire. John and the others get out of the car and the FBI agent fires back but is shot. Another officer is killed and John and Matt get into another car, driving off as the chopper stays close on their tail. John drives through the streets, leading them to a fire hydrant, which he smashes, causing it to burst onto the chopper and knock one of the gunners out. The chopper still chases them as bullets whiz past John. They drive into a tunnel, and the hackers manipulate traffic so that vehicles are coming from both directions. They shut the lights off and John tries maneuvering through them. Matt panics and gets out of the car. John screams at him as he gets out too. They make a break for it as dozens of cars crash into each other. They reach safety behind a concrete pole. John is now extremely angry. He begins to rant as he gets back into the car and drives off alone, heading directly toward the chopper. He leads the car up a ramp and jumps out as the vehicle flies up and smashes into the chopper. He is bloodied as Matt runs up to help him. They start laughing at the ordeal as Matt helps him up and they begin moving again. Thomas contacts the lone survivor in the helicopter, Rand, who confirms that John and Matthew have escaped yet again. Frustrated but determined, Thomas sends a new team to infiltrate FBI headquarters. Disguised as federal agents, they walk in undetected. Once inside, they swiftly take out the real officers and head straight for the server room. Setting up their equipment, they begin downloading highly sensitive government files. Meanwhile, John and Matthew arrive at a packed police precinct, hoping to speak with a sergeant. But with hundreds of people flooding the station, they struggle to get anyone's attention. Back at the FBI headquarters, Thomas and his team start deploying the stolen files, escalating their cyber attack. The woman coordinating the hackers, Mai, is now undercover, disguised as an FBI officer. She moves in undetected, preparing for the next phase of their plan. Outside the precinct, John and Matthew borrow a phone and manage to reach Bowman. They urgently explain what's happening, but before Bowman can fully process the information, he's interrupted. His team informs him that the hackers have seized control of all satellite and telecom systems. Suddenly, live footage appears, showing the White House erupting in a massive explosion. Panic spreads across the country as the video plays. Bowman rushes outside, staring at the White House in disbelief. But then it hits him. The explosion was fake, a carefully crafted illusion designed to spread fear. Before John and Matthew can get more information, their call with Bowman is cut off. With time running out, John pushes Matthew to figure out their next move. Matthew realizes that the only way the hackers could manipulate essential utilities like power would be through direct physical access. Their best bet is the main power grid in Virginia. It's likely their next target. Without wasting a moment, John and Matthew steal a car and speed toward the power grid. But they're already too late. Mai reaches the facility first, easily infiltrating the site. She takes out the guards one by one and gains full access to the power grid, setting the stage for the next devastating attack. Hours later, John and Matt arrive at the plant. The place is dead silent, and they immediately sense something is off. Inside, Mai shuts down the entire facility, cutting electricity across the country. Watching the cameras, she spots John and Matt and sends her men to intercept them. One of the men catches John and a brutal fistfight breaks out. John fights him off and manages to take him down with a couple of well-placed shots. With no time to waste, he and Matt rush toward the control room where Mai is in the middle of shutting down all power. John storms in and holds a gun to her head while Matt jumps on the computer, frantically trying to undo her work. But Mai isn't going down easily. She disarms John and the two start fighting. She knocks him to the ground and turns toward Matt, only for John to launch himself at her, slamming her into the wall. Matt successfully restores power, but before they can react, Mai regains consciousness. She suddenly kicks John, sending him flying out of a window. She then overpowers Matt, forcing him to undo what he just fixed. Thinking fast, John jumps into a car and speeds up a ramp, crashing straight into the control room. The impact sends Mai into an elevator shaft, but she manages to grab onto the cables and starts climbing. John, still hanging on, fights his way up as well. As they cling to the car, a vicious struggle ensues. McClane uses the ropes to strangle Mai, leveraging them to climb higher. He lands a powerful blow, knocking her unconscious. Just then, one of her agents starts firing down the shaft, but Matt sneaks up behind him, takes him out, and sends him plummeting down. The car loses its grip and plunges into the darkness below. At the last second, John grabs a fire escape, holding on for dear life as Mai and her agent fall to their deaths. Back at the control panel, Matt scrambles to disrupt their software. Suddenly, they receive a call from Thomas, who believes he's speaking to Mai. Seizing the moment, they track his call and reveal the truth. Mai is dead. Thomas, shocked and enraged, reveals that she was his wife. Furious, he orders his hackers to reroute gas to the station, planning to blow them up. Realizing the danger, Matt urgently contacts Bowman and sends him a photo of Thomas. Bowman identifies him as a former FBI agent, one who was ostracized and now seeks revenge. Panic sets in as Matt warns John that a gas explosion is imminent. They take off running just as the building erupts in flames. Diving into a nearby van, they barely shield themselves from the explosion. Though battered and bruised, they know they can't stop now. As the dust settles, Matt grows frantic, realizing the entire country is still without power. Their only option is to find an expert hacker in Baltimore, someone known as the Warlock. John, though reluctant, agrees. With no time to spare, they board the helicopter Mai arrived in. As John takes the controls, he glances at Matt and admits flying isn't exactly his strong suit. Soon enough, they land at their destination, but McClane botches the landing, damaging the vehicle in the process. With no time to dwell on it, he and Matt make their way to the Warlock's house. An older woman answers the door. It's Warlock's mother. She leads them down to the basement, where Matt greets Warlock with familiarity. But instead of a warm welcome, Warlock berates him, blaming him for the chaos unfolding across the country. The tension escalates, and all three get into a heated argument. McClane, running out of patience, threatens Warlock, making it clear he'll do whatever it takes to get the information he needs on Thomas. Warlock finally gives in, revealing that Thomas is ex-FBI. He explains that he may have tracked the location of the servers Thomas is using. They hack into the system, but before they can dig too deep, Thomas and his team hack back. A tense digital standoff begins as they communicate in real time. Suddenly, Thomas takes things to a personal level. He calls John's daughter Lucy while making sure McClane can watch and listen. She's trapped in an elevator, and Thomas pretends to be a 911 operator, toying with her and taunting John. Then, without warning, he ends the call. Warlock looks over at McClane and gives him a nod. He's tracked Thomas down. Without hesitation, John rushes out, heading straight for him, with Matt following close behind. Meanwhile, Thomas's men manage to capture Lucy, dragging her out and taking her directly to him. She fights back, but they shut her up with a few hard punches before tying her up. At the same time, Thomas eliminates most of his hacker team, sparing only one to continue their work. John and Matt track Thomas down to his base and make their way inside. Moving carefully through the facility, Matt hacks into the system and triggers the alarms. At FBI headquarters, the alert goes off. The location? Woodlawn. It's a classified facility where the government stores financial records for the entire country, a secret program designed by Thomas himself. As John and Matt move deeper into the base, they're intercepted by one of Thomas's men. A fight breaks out and Matt is thrown down a ventilation shaft. John manages to incapacitate the attacker before rushing to check on Matt, who's now several meters below. At the same time, Bowman scrambles to gather whatever men he can. They need to get to Woodlawn before it's too late. John picks up the fallen man's radio and speaks directly to Thomas, telling him exactly where he is and that he's coming for him. As Thomas's men close in, Matt scrambles to climb out of the hole, staying out of sight as he moves. He finds his way to a secured room and quickly realizes something alarming. The encryption system they're using is the algorithm he designed for Thomas. Gaining access, he discovers their real plan. They're siphoning funds from the entire country. Before he can act, a mercenary sneaks up behind him, pressing a gun to his head. Meanwhile, John and Thomas trade words again over the radio. Lucy seizes the moment to shout that only 5 of Thomas's men are left. Furious, Thomas slaps her and orders the rest of his team to kill John. Matt is dragged to Thomas, who demands access to the servers, but Matt refuses, revealing that he's encrypted them. Thomas can't get in. Frustrated but determined, Thomas orders his crew to pack up and move. He leaves one hacker behind, tasked with breaking Matt's encryption. Elsewhere in the facility, John is ambushed by Rand. A brutal fight breaks out and Rand manages to disarm him. He opens fire, forcing John to take cover. Spotting a liquid nitrogen canister, McClane cracks it open, freezing Rand solid before sending him plummeting down the shaft, killing him instantly. Outside, Thomas and his crew load into a van and speed off, but McClane isn't far behind. He jumps onto the roof of a truck, hanging on as they race down the highway, hoping to escape before the FBI arrives. Crawling toward the front, John takes aim, shoots the driver, and seizes control of the vehicle. Inside the van, Thomas turns to Matt, torturing him to force him into unlocking the server. But before he can break, they notice something in the distance. McClane is still alive, still coming for them. On the truck, McClane makes contact with Bowman, who quickly locks onto their location and redirects his entire team to intercept. Desperate, Thomas and his hacker reach out to an F-35 fighter jet, tricking the pilot into believing McClane is a terrorist. The jet opens fire, blasting his truck apart. Somehow, John manages to keep control, dodging gunfire as the road crumbles around him. With no other choice, he leaps from the wreckage, landing directly onto the jet. The pilot, realizing the damage, ejects, leaving John scrambling for a way out. At the last moment, he jumps clear, crashing onto the pavement, barely surviving. Thomas and his crew arrive at a warehouse, dragging Matt inside. Without hesitation, Thomas shoots Matt in the leg, warning him to unlock the algorithm, or Lucy dies. Left with no choice, Matt starts the process. Just then, John bursts in, taking out 2 of Thomas's men before getting shot himself. Wounded, he collapses as Thomas approaches, pressing a gun to his shoulder. But McClane has one last trick up his sleeve. He grabs the gun, pulling the trigger, firing straight through himself and into Thomas. In the chaos, Matt grabs a gun and takes out the last remaining mercenary. The gunfire stops. Lucy rushes to her father, finding him battered but alive. The FBI storms the warehouse, securing the scene. As they're taken for medical attention, John and Matt exchange exhausted jokes about the scars they'll be left with. Laughing through the pain, they're loaded into an ambulance, finally headed for the hospital. A Good Day to Die Hard opens with a news reporter explaining billionaire Yuri Komarov will soon be on trial with suspicion he may have been locked up due to a political maneuver orchestrated by Defense Minister Viktor Chagarin. Chagarin, in the meantime, pays Komarov a visit in his cell. It would seem the two are at odds with one another, and even though they were friends once, Viktor asks Komarov for the file in exchange for his life without trial. Refusing to agree, Viktor becomes enraged and promises his voice will never be heard in the courtroom. CIA headquarters are quickly alerted to this, and the scene cuts to Moscow, where a biker speeds through the city and into a parking garage. Once inside, we are introduced to Irina, while a man outside walks into the building in front of him and calls out a man named Anton, killing him on Komarov's behalf. Sometime later, we come back to our boy John McClane. His detective friend, Murphy, tells him they found him. Handing over a file, Murphy explains that the man is being held in Moscow and is about to be sentenced to death. John explains that the man is still his son, Jack, and he needs to look out for him. Taking a flight straight to Moscow, John bids his daughter Lucy farewell. She hands him an idiot's travel guide before he leaves, and the two say their goodbyes. Stepping out and boarding the plane, John looks through his son's file and is not too happy, resting his head and taking a nap. The scene cuts to Jack being interrogated by a prosecutor. There, Jack offers evidence against Yuri Komarov by confessing in court that he hired him to kill Anton. The following day, John is in the back of a cab and tries speaking some Russian to the driver. The man tells him he speaks English and laughs at him. Heading to the courthouse but stuck in peak traffic, John bonds with his driver, who mocks American music and tries singing it. Being a nice guy, he tells John he should walk the remaining 2 blocks, and he does exactly that. Both Komarov and Jack are put in shackles and are being escorted to the courthouse. At the courthouse, security and protests are both quite apparent as John has a look. He gets to witness firsthand how his son and the billionaire are walked through the civilians and into the courtroom under heavy protection. Inside, the courtroom is also chaotic, and both men are placed in their boxes. As the session commences, John waits outside and notices a military truck parked around the corner. As court is underway, 3 cars approach the courthouse, and Jack gives Komarov a nod, with the 3 cars being granted entry. A man inside the military van asks for the detonator. Behind him is a fully equipped army when suddenly protesters and court attendees all begin panicking when the military van comes rushing in. The mini-army emerges, and both convicts are freed from their boxes. The men begin firing at anyone in sight and look through the building to discover the prisoners have escaped. As Irina walks in, she tells Alec they need Komarov alive, but Jack can die. However, Jack steals a van and tells Komarov he is his ally when John suddenly steps in front of the vehicle. As the thugs go looking for the prisoners, John's voice screaming at his son is heard from a distance, and Jack raises a gun to his father's head, telling him he shouldn't be here. Jack takes off in the van when the military vehicle chases close by. John also decides to join the chase, and Jack finds a hidden earpiece in the vehicle and contacts the CIA. It would appear that Jack is working for the CIA, and with eyes in the sky, they try to extract the duo. However, their mission window has closed and Jack is forced to resort to Plan B and go to a safe house. Jack swears at his father for wasting his damn time the extraction and for attracting the army truck that's trying to kill them. John wants to redeem himself though, and while Alec rampages through dozens of cars, all three vehicles are starting to get into dangerous territory, causing mass damage including civilian casualties. Alec gets annoyed at John and fires a rocket his way. While it doesn't directly hit, it still causes John's vehicle to flip over. Still alive, he attempts to hijack another vehicle but realizes this is not America. After knocking out a man raging at him and stealing his car, John continues the chase. Alec takes it up a notch and John sees the commotion. Deciding to also take it to the next level, he performs a pretty awesome stunt and damages about $10 million worth of cars. Alec eventually catches up to Jack and begins hitting the van all over the shop. Lucy simultaneously calls her father and he talks to her while saving his son's ass. Putting the phone down, John hits the military van over and over. Using a ramp, John flips Alec's vehicle off a bridge and the chase is finally concluded. But as John's car was also sent to the next life, Jack goes back to save him. The police and armed men quickly get into a shootout and Jack tells his dad to jump in. On the way to their safe house, John wants to know what the hell is going on and Jack tells him to shut up and don't touch a thing. Victor is immediately told that Komarov has escaped and the stress kicks in. Not knowing who took him, Victor gets annoyed upon hearing an American man was involved. The group in the meantime arrives at a safe house, and Agent Collins asked Komarov if he has the file on Victor Chagrin, but doesn't get a response. With John realizing that his son is a spy, he laughs at him and calls him 007. Collins promises Komarov freedom in exchange for the file, but says he is not afraid for his own life. As Komarov is hesitant in believing three men can help him escape, John says he's not part of the team. Komarov agrees on the condition his daughter comes with him and says the file is in a vault in Pripyat, Kiev Oblast, Ukraine. Being handed a phone, Komarov calls his daughter and tells her to meet him at his and his wife's first dance. As they get ready to leave, Komarov cops a bullet in the arm while Collins gets one in the head. The goons have arrived at the base and John shows his son why he is the real OG, blasting the to smithereens. Jack blows a wall open and the trio makes an escape. Along the way, they are fired at but eventually get to the rooftop. After climbing down to the ground level, Jack treats Komarov's wound and tells his dad he ruined 3 years of planning in 5 minutes. After destroying John's phone, Jack says the mission continues and they need to make it to a hotel. Making a quick stop to grab what they need, they continue onward to grab the key from a specific hotel. Jack keeps on being rude to his dad and Komarov takes notice of this. Speaking of children, the two men talk about their daughters and how they are the joys of their lives. Being guilty as they have dragged their children into mess after mess, Jack hears his dad speak his heart out. Telling them it's time to move, Jack is told they need to make it to the top floor and John makes a small bribe to a worker there. Riding the elevator and getting ready for a battle, the doors open up and the entire level seems to be abandoned. No guards, no enemies. Komarov looks around and sees his daughter Irina waiting for him. Reuniting with each other and sharing a moment, John asks if Jack wants a hug and he laughs. John says his spider senses are tingling and he feels something bad is about to happen. As Komarov goes to grab the key, John asks Irina how she got here that quick. She claims to have gone through Garden Ring, and John knows that would have been impossible due to traffic he encountered himself. As Komarov grabs the key, Alec makes his presence known alongside all his men. Irina acts petrified, and John refuses to lower his weapon until Irina holds her father hostage. Dropping their weapons and being forced to kneel, Irina confesses she's doing this for millions. Like the rat piece of shit she is, she threatens her dad before walking away. Alec hates that Americans think of themselves as these special cowboys and kicks the guns away before hitting the duo one at a time. Outside, Irina takes her father to a chopper while the boys upstairs play with their food. Unaware Jack has a hidden blade on him, John laughs and mocks Alec. Jack joins the laughing party, and while distracted, Jack cuts his zip ties loose. Both the McClanes initiate a counterattack and do very well to use their surroundings to their advantage. John and Jack begin arguing again, but they honestly have the same attitude and minds when it comes to warfare. Killing every thug in the room, Alec rushes to the chopper and the McClanes watch it take off. Jack is not happy one bit, but John watches as it circles around back to them. Realizing they're in trouble, they get down as Alec shoots at them. Rushing to the nearest exit, they are forced to jump out of a window and land on some scaffold. The chopper still targets them and refuses to stop firing. The two psychos end up in a garbage container, and Alec finally lets off the attack. The McClanes make a run for it, and with a mission success, Victor is told the mission was completed. He tells Alec to kill Komarov and his daughter after they enter the vault, but I'm not really sure why there are so many people walking behind him, but it looks freaking gangster. In the meantime, Jack is quite perplexed about how a daughter could betray her own blood. John isn't too fazed though and would rather focus on the matter at hand, with Jack on the opinion the mission was a complete failure. John, being sarcastic, says it's time to go home and get those CIA slippers as a reward. The conversation takes a turn when Jack mentions the file contains evidence about Victor in relation to Chernobyl. Both Komarov and Victor used to siphon weapons-grade uranium, but they got greedy and caused the meltdown. Having a bad breakup, Victor chucked Komarov in jail, and this mission failure could result in a catastrophe. John is ready to let loose and takes the metal screw out of Jack's body. Needing a car, the two decide to head to a high-class Chechen hangout, and damn do they find some artillery in the boot of the car. Once on the road, their destination is none other than Chernobyl. Jack laughs and knows this is quite a stupid idea. John is really not liking this vacation, but there's nothing he can do about it now. Inside the Chernobyl exclusion zone, Alec alongside Komarov and his daughter make their way to the vault containing the incriminating evidence. Geared up, they walk toward the inner vault, and Komarov looks quite frightened. Father and son soon arrive at the facility and notice Alec's entire team on the base. Needing a plan to save Komarov's life, Komarov finds the vault that the file is in. As the duo steal the gear required for such a mission, their only plan is to run in guns blazing. Before they run into battle, the two have a heart-to-heart with each other, and John apologizes to Jack for ruining his day even though he did have some fun. Jack stays quiet as his father says he loves him, and with that, it's time to kill some Drilling a hole through the vault's lock, Alec asks for the key and takes it from Komarov. The duo in the meantime enters the same building just as the key is inserted. Unlocking the vault, it opens a completely new room, and Alec trips out on what he's looking at. The radiation in the room is off the charts, and Irina laughs and says to bring it in. A chopper then appears carrying a large truck, which is actually a lead-lined storage unit designed to safely transport uranium. John and Jack quickly neutralize two assailants while an entire team approaches the vault. Inside, they are awestruck by the level of radiation inside the room, but reckon it's all clear and they can ditch their suits. While the McClanes are lurking around, Irina tells Alec there is over $1 billion worth of enriched uranium. Claiming to be stable in this form, Alec starts getting annoyed and wants the damn file when suddenly Komarov blows his brains out, literally. It would appear that Irina is just as sick as her father, who has played everyone the whole time. With daughter and father showing their true colors for the first time, another chopper arrives at the compound. With the sentries being taken out and the men downstairs preparing the uranium for transportation, it is going to need a miracle to stop this army. Downstairs, Irina says they have 5 minutes until they leave. But this sicko looks like he has something else on his mind. Looking at Alec's corpse, he grabs his radio, and a jacked-up, roided-out maniac helps with the extraction outside. Komarov, the idiot, calls Victor to rub it in his face. Being in the place where it all started, where Victor had betrayed him, a man faking to be a masseur puts Victor in a chokehold and kills him on the spot. Only for Komarov to listen in euphoric revenge, ready for takeoff. Irina calls in her guards but realizes they are dead. John and Jack locate Komarov, but John is suspicious and asks what's in the boxes around them. Komarov doesn't answer, but Jack knows it to be weapons-grade uranium. John realizes that Komarov has betrayed everyone, including them. After seeing that Alec is dead on the ground, they know for a fact that there was never a file, and the whole thing was about making billions off the uranium. Admitting it to be true, Yuri holds his radio for his troops to hear that he is being held down. Headbutting and walking Yuri out like the dog he is, the McClanes are attacked. Forced to hide behind cover, bullets fly everywhere and Yuri runs for his life. Irina is told to get to the roof and she boards the chopper. The roided-out maniac is then sent to the next world when a grenade goes off. Trying to catch Yuri before he escapes, the McClanes split up, with John somehow managing to grab onto the chopper. Crawling his way inside without anyone noticing, he takes out the two guards blocking the cockpit. Jack and Yuri get into a shootout, and Jack is pierced by a bullet. John then tries blasting his way to the cockpit, causing them to notice him. As the chopper goes to gun down Jack, John is not going to let that happen and swears at the Russians.
Shit we do for our kids. Yippee-ki-yay, mother.
Using the truck inside to weigh down the chopper, it becomes non-operable and collides with the building. Jack uses this distraction to neutralize Yuri, who laughs at the thought of John dying. Jack tosses him off the building and lets his own daughter slice him up. John hangs on for dear life at that point and lets go to perfectly land safely. The truck completely falls out though, and the chopper is now able to fly, which obviously targets the McClanes. But being out of ammo, the psychotic launches at the building just as the duo jumps out. In quite an extraordinary scene, Irina and the pilot finally die after being such a nuisance. Jack emerges from the water below but doesn't see his dad next to him and calls out his name. Responding only after being called Dad, the two reunite, and this is what you call some good father-son bonding time. They both get up and walk through the wreckage, expecting the radiation to make them bald. Standing side by side, they finally stop arguing with each other, and John finally admits that trouble just keeps on finding him, no matter where in the world he is. After some time, the CIA flies both heroes back to the US. Lucy watches from afar and sees that both her brother and father are alive and well. Reuniting with each other, the last Die Hard movie comes to an emotional end. And with that, I truly thank you for all the support you have given me over the years, and I'll try to reply to every comment down below. And as always, stay awesome and take care.